Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. I had a couple of helpful comments from people in the last couple days on some other videos that I had done about the effects of fees on compound annual growth rate and the fact that on most marketplaces you will pay a 12.5% selling fee to sell something, and that takes a chomp out of your long-term gains. And so at the time, I just kind of made a simple reply that, it doesn't really matter a bunch. It kind of gets washed out because of the way compound annual growth rate is calculated. But now I've actually made some plots. I'm going to explain how these work. I showed my source code up there a moment ago. You can go recreate this in whatever language you like, or you can just double check that I'm doing the calculations right. So what I've done here is I've plotted two things: realized compound annual growth rate and delta compound annual growth rate, and I've plotted them as functions of top line compound annual growth rate and the time span of the investment. And what all of these things mean: first off, top line compound annual growth rate, what that means is, what do we get when we just talk about how much a product appreciated in the market, not what you actually get for selling it. So what was the compound annual growth rate in the market? And sometimes when I'm doing analyses, that's what I compute and that's what I report, because it may be an analysis that's simply saying, how are these things doing in the market compared to each other? For instance, when I talk about set box performance versus draft box performance, I'm talking about top line compound annual growth rate, because we're not really talking about the business side of, how much do you make when you actually sell? What's the fee structure and all of those considerations? We're simply talking about, how is the market treating this thing? So time span would be, how long do you hold the investment, how many years? And then realized compound annual growth rate is the calculation of, okay, let's say I had something and I bought it for X dollars. I then held it for 5 years. It had a top line compound annual growth rate of 15%. And then I sold it. I had to pay a 12.5% market fee to sell it. Now let me work backwards. From that 5 years that I owned it, what was my realized compound annual growth rate? So essentially, it is the top line CAGR with the reduction of the market fee. And so this curve you're seeing is basically what is happening to your realized compound annual growth rate as a result of that 12% reduction. And so if we just want to take a couple points to talk about, and we'll see that when you're down here, okay, so it says your time span was 10 years and your top line compound annual growth rate was 10%, but your realized compound annual growth rate after the 12.5% market fee was only 8.54%. And so that gets into what we're seeing over here, which if we come into the same point on the plot, we'll see that that's a difference of 1.45%. So what I've done for the delta compound annual growth rate is I've just taken the top line and I've subtracted the realized from it. So this curve here is telling you how many percents of compound annual growth rate are you losing. It is not the percentage of compound annual growth rate that you're losing, it's how many percents. And so you subtract it, you don't multiply it. And the point that I'm getting at with all of this is that this delta, this surface here, this is what you're losing as a function of the market fee. This curve on the left is what you have left. And so what you're losing, obviously you see when you have higher top line CAGRs, what you lose, it goes up slightly, but again, these are subtractive. And so if we were to look at something out here, and so say that you had something, you held it for 8 years, it had a top line compound annual growth rate of 30%, well, you would lose 2.1 percentage points off of that 30%. You would still have 28 percentage points remaining. And so that's why I don't always include market fees in my analyses, especially when we're just talking about market analyses and not business analyses. It's because they don't really matter. In the long term, when you're talking about holding these products for more than 4, 5, 6 years, and you're talking about the kinds of compound annual growth rates that we typically see with TCG products from Magic and especially from Pokemon, it just doesn't make that big of a difference. If I've held something for 8 years and it was a particularly good Pokemon product, it had a top line compound annual growth rate of 30%. And so after I pay that 12.5% fee, my total realized CAGR has come down by 2.1%. I'm not really that concerned with that. And so that's why I kind of disregard those things, and why, if you're somebody who thinks, well, I'm going to hold these products for 2 years or 3 years or something like this, well, if you had a top line CAGR of 16%, you held it for 3 years, you would have to subtract 5 percentage points of CAGR off of it for that market fee. And so that's the thing. If you're holding for short periods of time, it has a bigger effect on you. So the other way to think about this is you are compounding these compound annual growth rates, but your fee is taken off the top at the end. And you can kind of think of that in terms of how long does that represent of lost time value of money. And so let's say you had something with a top line compound annual growth rate of 12.5%, and then you decided to sell it. Well, if the market fee is 12.5% and its long-term appreciation rate is 12.5%, that basically means you lost 1 year of gains. So you lost the opportunity of 1 year that you held that product because you had to give that up as the fees to the market. And so you can also think if it had a 25% top line compound annual growth rate and a 12.5% market fee, you've only lost about 6 months. It's not exactly 6 months because we're talking about curves from compounding functions. They're exponentials. It's not straight line appreciation, but that kind of gets too much into the weeds. A good rule of thumb is you can just do that straight division and think of it that way. And again, on the other side, if it was something that, say, had a 6% top line compound annual growth rate and you had to pay a 12.5% fee, you'll lose somewhere around 2 years of appreciation of that product to the fees. And so you can see that if you hold something longer and if it has a higher compound annual growth rate, then just the effect of those fees overall is not that big of a deal. And lastly, another thing to keep in mind is markets have friction in them. All markets have friction in them. You can do things like leverage technology and online trading platforms and automating buys and sells and things like that to reduce the friction in a market. But the reality is every market selling any kind of thing has friction in it. And fees are a way to lubricate the market and make it work better. And so the fees that you pay to eBay or TCG Player, those are a cost that you pay for the value of the market that they are providing to you, for the fact that they are bringing tens of thousands of buyers to potentially see the product that you are trying to move. And that to some small extent, at least, they make some effort to keep a reputation system so that you get scammed less often. And you can see that on things like Facebook Marketplace, there is no fee to use that, but the downside is it is not a nationwide market. It's typically more local, and it's harder to do efficient matches between buyers and sellers. There may not be any pricing history for you to do price discovery with, and so there are fewer fees, but you're clearing up less of the friction in the market because Facebook Marketplace is not trying to be a specific market for TCGs and specifically sealed boxes of TCG products. And so no matter what, you will encounter friction in the market and fees in order to lubricate beyond that friction. And maybe that means that you're going to grow a YouTube community, grow a Patreon channel, and then you are going to try to do transactions through PayPal where the fees are only, 2.9% plus 30 cents, something like that. So the fees are lower, but all you've done is you've lubricated somewhere else. You've gone and built a community to potentially sell to. That's Rudy's business model. Or maybe you'll open a physical card store. And so then you're not paying 12.5% fees to eBay and TCG Player. Instead, you're paying rent and insurance and all kinds of other expenses associated with having a brick and mortar card store. But those are the lubricants that you have to put into the market. And additionally, it doesn't clear up that bit of friction that you really only make sales in that store to local people. It's not a nationwide or potentially worldwide business. So don't worry so much about the fees. You can see mathematically here that basically if you're talking about high top line compound annual growth rate products like Pokemon, like Magic, Master Sets, and if you hold them for many years, the fees don't really matter much. They only make a small difference. And on the more philosophical level, you have to pay the fees to participate in a market no matter what. So let me know what you think, guys. It was helpful for people to bring that up in their questions. And I thought this would be a good way to kind of visually demonstrate and show how it worked. That essentially, as you come out to holding these products on longer timelines, the effect of the fee is lower. And because it's subtractive and it stays pretty level across these lines going this direction, it's just not that big of a deal compared to those huge top line compound annual growth rates. So let me know what you think. Any questions? If you see a bug in my code, let me know. Otherwise, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade.